two, testing, testing. One, two, one, two.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming early to our program this evening. I'm Dr. Carol Ann Buff. I'm on the board of Bloomington Early Music. You may have seen me last night waving my arms around frantically during our sing-along. I am also a professor of music at Jacobs School of Music in the Department of Choral Conducting, and it's been my immense pleasure to put together a program this evening of African American spirituals. For this event, I have been joined by four amazing human beings. First of all, I just have to say, I feel like I have walked away from this process with four new friends. It's just been a really, really special thing for me. I'm a singer, but I'm not going to sing on this concert tonight. And I really have just appreciated them all joining in on my vision of what this program could be. Joining me here right now are two of my new friends. I have Jarrell Gray immediately here in the center, and I have Ambrielle Ivy McCoy. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and I want them to just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing here at IU, and we'll go on to some more detail in just a moment.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Jarrell R. Gray. I am a recent graduate of the Jacobs School of Music and Music Ed. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I received my master's in Music Ed May 9th, I believe it was. And so I am freshly new back on the scene. I am a composer. I am an aspiring conductor, etc. And so I'm very excited about this opportunity from Dr. Buff, and certainly happy to be on this panel.
Hi, I'm Ambrielle Ivy. I'm currently at IU getting my performance degree in voice, and I'm kind of this past year, I worked as the vocal coach for the African American Choral Ensemble. Oh, thank you. They're a great group. You should check it out. And I'm transitioning into becoming more of like the road manager for the group, as well as possibly being the vocal coach in continuation. And so I graduated last year with my bachelor's from Mississippi in music. And so I came from Mississippi all the way here, so I have a good bit of experience with some of these spirituals. A lot of them are from my background, and I listened to them growing up, and yeah. So this has been a really fun project to work on.
Well, thank you so much. And that's actually a really good segue. One of the things that I discovered, so I'm a historian, right? So the first thing I said was, oh, I would love to do a spirituals program, but then I immediately said, well, what's the oldest spiritual I can find? Because I've sung a lot of arrangements of spirituals. You may be familiar with certain names like Moses Hogan, for instance, or Harry Burleigh or something like that. So lots of really, really famous arrangements of spirituals. But I was like, well, what's the origin of these? And so I went and I dug around and I found a bunch of things that I was like, well, I know this spiritual, well, I know this spiritual, I know this spiritual. And you mentioned that you have sung, or you knew of these from your childhood, and I'm just kind of curious what you know of the spirituals before we started this project. What's your experience with using spirituals in your daily life?
Well, I actually grew up with them at my home church in Chicago. I was blessed to have the pianist at the church. He had 2 degrees in music. And so in that African-American setting, you always were generally accustomed to musicians who heard and learned by ear. But rarely did you come across someone who could, oh my goodness, today, and he ended up being my formal piano teacher, and still to this day we talk, but I would watch him as a young child transpose on sight hymns, just reading, and it didn't matter who came in the church, it just did not matter. And so, one Sunday I went up to him and I said, I would love piano lessons. I must have been about 6 or 7. So he said, okay, let's go talk to your mom, and the rest is history. But in my lessons, we would learn Bach, we'd look at Chopin, we'd look at all these things, but then we would also look at spirituals, we'd look at jazz, we'd look at gospel. So my lessons were always a well-rounded compass, if you will, of different things. And so we would sing, Did My Lord Deliver Daniel? In the youth choir, we'd sing in 4-part harmony and division and things. And at the time, I didn't know what exactly I was doing. I was just doing what I was told. So when I came to college, I'm just like, oh, wow, this is what this is called. And I was being prepped before the time. So certainly I thank God for that provision of sort. But my foundation, certainly with Burleigh, with John W. Werg, more recent composers, Moses Hogan, Charles Lloyd Jr., a lot of those who have taken the spirituals to new dimensions. And so I'm quite familiar with them, I must say, and I'm appreciative of it, truly.
So like I mentioned, I grew up in Mississippi, and I didn't necessarily have the traditional sense where I vividly remember learning a lot of them. It's more of that, as I was looking through the music, I was like, oh, I know this one, and I know this one, and oh, that's strangely in the back of, I feel some vagueness in the memory, like in my memory, and I just remembered that, like, my great-grandmother who used to watch us, she sang them around the house. I did hear them in church, and we did sing them in like children's church and things like that. And but a lot of it, I think, was just being in Mississippi and being in the culture and just being around people who this is their history. This is where the lineage comes from, and being just immersed in it, rather than having like I learned this on this day and this day. There were some of them that was the case, but and I think it was really just exposure to them without even knowing that they had seeped in, until like I'm looking at a sheet of music and it's like, oh, I know this. Why do I know this? So this was a really great experience for me, particularly because I feel like it brought up a lot of the memories from my childhood of like, oh wow, this is like my history. This is a part of my culture and a part of my past, and I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you. The thing that I found was kind of interesting, as I say, I'm a historian and I like artifacts. And so one of the earliest books that I found that was published of these tunes was from a period immediately following the Civil War. This is a book, it's called Slave Songs of the United States. And it was originally collected by a group of 3 white abolitionists who traveled to South Carolina. And their immediate goal was to be missionaries and to help recently enslaved people, because you can imagine this is a group of people that had no infrastructure. You know, you would say, okay, well, you're free. Well, what do you do? How do you survive? How do you eat? And so what their goal was to go down and help people sort out what was going to happen to them, where they were going to live, what they were going to eat, how they were going to earn money, how they were going to, you know, take care of their children. All of these important things that, you know, you kind of don't really think about. You say, you know, yay, it's great and noble that there's a proclamation that's been made that you're now free, but it was very, very challenging. And what they did was they had gone to these people in South Carolina, and they said to each other, these songs will disappear because the very horrible thing, quite frankly, that created the environment in which they were singing is now going to disappear. And so they immediately said, well, we're going to try and transcribe these things. It's hard to tell how accurate they were. These were not ethnomusicologists. And some of the writing is of its time. In their very introduction, they talk about things, they use very strange words like kind of savage or wild, right? This is the way they describe it, because these are not tame pieces. These are not, you know, correct musical pieces. It's folk music of a type, right? And you, Andrea, you mentioned, oh, well, I think I kind of know this piece, but then it'll take a left turn. We discovered that there's some pieces that have, like there's a melody that you might recognize, and then there's another part of the melody that's like, oh, well, where'd that come from? The other thing that they did was they only transcribed melodies. They did not transcribe any sort of harmony. They claim, again, in the introduction, that there was no harmony. But we know that this is not true. And in fact, the historical record tells us that they did harmonize. I have a feeling kind of in the same way, Jarrell, that you were talking about.
Yes.
I'm kind of curious, you know, you mentioned that there's a sort of an oral tradition.
Yes, so generally, you have the spirituals, but then you have many things that have, hopefully this is not fast forwarding to perhaps a future segment that you want to get into, but you have what we like to call lined spirituals, which are, in a sense, a derivative of, you all know Isaac Watts, right? Okay, so in the hymnal, you'll have, let's just say we'll do What a Friend We Have in Jesus. And even though he didn't write that one, but I'll just choose that since everyone knows that as a hymn. You'll have, what a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear, right, in that type of manner. But what the slaves began to do was to incorporate a bit of a spiritual feel to it. So they would change it to a minor key, and they would go, what a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer, right? And so in that one, what we would call, so what we would call that is, in the terms that we are accustomed to, polyphonic texture would start. So I would start, and so you would begin to have this contrapuntal aspect, and things start to begin to form. And so even in church, back to Isaac Watts, you'd have, I love the Lord, he heard my cry and pitied every groan, right? And then all of the congregants would say, I love the Lord, right? And so it would be elongated and stretched out and bended and grown. And so these are all extensions essentially of the spiritual that I heard as a young that I heard as a young man in church at 5 and 6, and I'd watch the saints, they'd get happy in the spirit and they'd fall out, and many say, are they crazy? Are they losing their minds? No, they're happy with the Holy Ghost. They're caught up in the spirit and they would fall out. And I mean, I would just see all this as a young child. So my goodness, if y'all could see what was in my head, y'all probably run out the door. But it was all very influencing of not only how I interpret music, not only, in a sense, you can say that it helped me count irregular meters before I actually knew what they were, and so it's even in regard of the other day when we were practicing, I noticed just the intervallic relationship of what was written on the paper, and I'm like, this could be a good sight singing exercise. This could be this could be that, right? And so it's really educational and informative beyond just the spiritual, right? Et cetera, right?
Absolutely. Well, Ambria, you're going to sing tonight. A beautiful setting. But she's a gorgeous singer. All of these musicians are just amazing, amazing people. But you're going to sing, we'll hear from Katiana, who's over there. Hello. Yes. And Ambria are both going to sing two different versions of a very famous spiritual called Motherless Child. Mm-hmm. And one of the versions is major, and your version is major.
Mine's major. And
one is minor. And they're in different meters. Mm-hmm. In fact, yours, I think, changes halfway through.
It does.
Yeah, I think it kind of speaks to, I think, what Jarrell was saying, which is this idea that they move magically between keys and between pitches and between rhythms. I shouldn't say magically, because that essentializes it. It's just, it works. And it works in such a deeply moving and very personal way. I find is really really incredible. And to find them printed again in these books from the 19th century, I think is.
Well, I think it goes to show a tradition that we still carry today in church. As far as like a lot of times, there's a lot of ad-lib going on when we're singing songs, and especially when it comes to worship, and you're getting led in the Spirit, you allow the Holy Spirit to just kind of take you and move you. And if you're not as structured, because it does depend on the church and the musical director, but if there's a little bit more free flow and allowance, then people do carry. And so it's like you might take that same song and you could change the words completely. There have been times that where it was like, I surrender all to thee, our blessed Savior. You could have someone start, amazing grace, amazing grace, amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Like you could have something like that where they're just kind of ad-libbing and they're taking it somewhere else, or they do change the key, or they make it going from major to minor. And I think it's really just there's just like a flow to it, and because a lot of times the instrumentalist and everyone in the church learns by ear, you kind of just go with it. And so I always think that that's really cool. And then one of the things that I know you had mentioned it a little bit earlier, was like how they just kind of change, and it's because of there's just such a free flow that we have so many different versions and different arrangements. And I think it was Rise and Shine. So you'll hear one version of it tonight. But the one that I was actually introduced to was actually by my father-in-law when I got married. My husband was telling me, he was like, every single Sunday we got woken up to Rise, Shine, give God the glory, glory. And my father-in-law would just scream it at the top of his lungs throughout the entire house, waking up everybody. So, and I was like, I love that so much. And so I got the treat and the pleasure that on Christmas morning, he woke me up to Rise, Shine, give God the glory, glory. And I was like, yay! Everyone else hated me. They were like, why would you do this? But I was so happy to be included in this family tradition. Yeah.
And unfortunately, the version that I found is not that version. But the irony is that there is one thing that I thought was hilarious. The other day we were rehearsing, and I said, "Oh, Jacob's Ladder." You know, I said I used to sing Jacob's Ladder like around a campfire. Mm-hmm. It was like a good old camp song. Mm-hmm. Rise and Shine was another one, church school, you know, sort of what's the song. But the funny thing about this version of Jacob's Ladder, we were taking a look at it, we sang it all the way through, we were like really happy with ourselves, sounded great. And Kobe, who's our tenor, he says, Dr. Buff, you're singing this in the wrong meter. And I said, what? And we all looked at our music and we said, oh my goodness, it's in 4 or it's in 2, it's supposed to be 3. And I was like, oh, okay. So catch us if we go off tonight, you'll know that. I did want to talk a little bit about, I don't want to make this too dark or anything, but the realization that when these songs were collected and they were published in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. But it was not music that was necessarily universally beloved. Again, it represented a past that I think that certain people really wanted to leave. There is a great story from one of the singers from the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Now, Fisk University is still in existence. In fact, the Fisk Jubilee Singers still are a fabulous vocal ensemble today. You can hear them. They have award-winning recordings, a really remarkable ensemble, vocal ensemble. Fisk Jubilee Singers were formed primarily of people who had been previously enslaved. And they were educated at Fisk. It was the mission of the school to bring people to the university to provide them education. And you should see the educations that they have, by the way. Many of the students went on to be accomplished professors themselves, teaching Latin, teaching classics. This was not just some sort of stopgap. This was a real rigorous education of the style of European universities. And so they formed a vocal ensemble that sang principally music of Europe, Bach and Brahms. And their choir director heard them one day because they were kind of humming amongst themselves some of the songs they knew as slaves. And he said, I want you to sing those songs. And they were like, oh, we don't really feel comfortable doing this. And then they kind of got at it, and they realized that they would do a program of their regular songs, and then they would have a couple of songs at the end of spirituals. And people really said, that's amazing music. It's on par with everything else that you're singing on the stage. And so Dr. White, who was their director, encouraged them to do so. And as I say, Ella Shepherd, who is one of the voices, one of the names that we have of the singers, she started making arrangements of these, and they were eventually published in the 1870s as the Fisk, it's the Jubilee Songs as Sung by the Jubilee Singers is the name of the songbook. She is uncredited as one of the musicians who contributed to that volume, but I'm firmly convinced that she was one of our musicians whose name ought to be at the top of the page as a preparer and composer. But she said, we've eventually found them to be our friends. These songs that we had put behind us, and we realized that they were valuable to us. And we see in literature that comes afterwards too, that the response from other people, from sociologists and politicians and people who worked for civil rights, who said, these are our friends and this is our music. And not only is it our music, it's music of America. And that's a super important aspect of this, that it coming out of its troublesome past, we find such a glorious repository and thankfully preserved through the Fisk Jubilee Songbook. So you'll hear some pieces tonight from the Fisk Songbook. Some pieces from also the Hampton Institute, which was another, it's still, again, another historically black university that is one of the sources of these songs tonight. And then a remarkable collection by, you mentioned John Wesley Work. So the Work brothers who put together their own songbook. And then he was John Wesley Work Jr. and John Wesley Work III also were really responsible for putting some of these together and making them arrangements and then in 4-part harmony. And so this is where we get a lot of our music tonight. So these are our friends, and I'm so super happy that we had a chance to put this together. Any last words from you all? Anything? Any favorites you want people to look out for tonight? No, you'll just get to hear it.
No, it's just
I have many.
like, there's so many.
Yeah, there are many. I would say Jacob's Ladder, simply because we went about it as what we knew, and only to realize, like you said, that it was in a completely different meter. So certainly, I'm looking forward to singing that one, so that you all can certainly hear that as well. But I would say, out of the set tonight, I think what's really interesting is the change of key for Were You There? Between, I believe, major and minor. Also some of the others where you'll have it in major and then you'll have a bit of a modulation into the minor. And I find that quite captivating, particularly as a composer. I looked at that when we rehearsed the other day and got many additional ideas to discover these different verses that have been added initially and how they segue into such. And so it's just really enlightening to know that this group of people who, the slaves that is, where this was sourced from, who had no formal training, were gifted by God to be able to sing such, right? And at an appointed time, missionaries were sent to transcribe and preserve and extend this tradition, right? And they were just simply listening, right? But these were already gifted folks who could hear and sing these things that no one taught them. That's how in awe I am of the spirituals, because it's such a gifted art form, just like Bach. For Bach to sit at the organ and come up with all of that, from foot to hands to manuals to all of these things, as a composer, certainly who, like Bach, he was a Christian, documented, he was saved, and said that all of his works essentially were to be thought of as sacred, right? And so as in praise to God. And so certainly being a predominantly sacred composer, that encourages me to know and to hone one's gift and respect it more so, knowing that you have the formal training, but you also have this compartment of giftedness. And it's a responsibility to, in my opinion, intertwine the two and give it back to him as best you can.
Well said. Thank you.
Well, I know for me, the version I'm used to singing of A Motherless Child is actually the one that Katiana is going to be singing tonight, and it's always been one of my favorite, and so it was really lovely to learn my version of it.
You own it now.
That was always one that kind of stuck with me, and like throughout my life, in different stages of my life, I would find myself walking through the house and humming it, and so it was really wonderful to get to see it on the program. And but I think for me, one of the things you touched on was like just a really wonderful thing, in that I feel like a part of why they were able to change the perspective of taking these songs and making them from something that was such a horrendous time in their life that they wanted to forget into something that they could cherish, is because they were all believers, and part of why they were given hope, part of why every section of our program, rest, faith, hope, jubilance, or jubilee. They're all in reverence to God and the different seasons that He's brought them through. And I'm also a believer, and so kind of going through these, it's like even today I can sing these songs and be in awe of that, and I can see why this was something that they would sing to bring them comfort, to bring them hope, to bring them light, to rejoice in a time where it was really dark, and that they probably wanted to give up and give in, but they didn't. And so I hope you all enjoy.
Yes, thank you
the
so much.
concert this
Thank you
evening.
so much to you both. I really appreciate it. Please, everyone, say thank you to Jarrell and we'll see you back here in just a few minutes.
Yes.